actually right here. It was in 2008, and I know that seems long ago to some of you, but 2008, there was a Bible school here in January. I came, and I remember that was the last Bible school I attended as a student. And so I have memories also. I loved Bible schools when I was young. I know this isn't exactly what you call a Bible school, but it's a little bit the same thing, sort of. But anyways, I'm glad to be here. We looked at I just have to a little bit. We sang that one song, and I took a picture of it because it's something that has just the last year or two, something that has become so incredibly meaningful to me is the thought of the final resurrection. The thought of when Jesus comes again. We sang this one, "He shall return in robes of white, the blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face." As I think of that climax of all glorious climactic events, I think of when finally one day God in heaven says, okay, work on earth is finished. And the next moment there is a trumpet blast, and I rise. Suddenly life re-enters, and all those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. All together and all over the earth, from the ocean, from the graves, from the cemeteries, from the forgotten places where everyone has died, suddenly there will be a resurrection of all resurrections. And everyone looks up and says, yes, you have kept your promise. Then will be fulfilled that which is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Death, as I see in the scripture, hasn't yet been. It has been in the sense that its doom is sure. But the last enemy to be destroyed is death. And that is destroyed when the final resurrection takes place. It's a glorious, wonderful thing. This morning, for a message to start, I told you yesterday, and it's going to be true for all three of my sessions, what I like to do best is simply take a chapter and go down through. And I get a theme from that chapter many times and kind of focus on that theme, but nevertheless, try to cover a little bit of each verse that's in there. And the chapter I want to do that to this morning is Philippians chapter 1. We're going to be projecting the verses up here as I go over them. Philippians chapter 1. But before we do that, because I want to focus on my theme a little bit, how many of you can quote by heart Romans 8:28? Anybody? Do you recognize the reference? Somebody should. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. For we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. Well, before we start in Philippians, I want to ask you a little bit what this means. We've heard this quoted, and it's a comfort to us, and it should be a comfort to us. But there are some real questions that arise if we take too shallow of a view of this. Oh, don't worry. God will work this out for your good. Yes, he will. But what is our good? What is our good? What does it mean for good? It doesn't mean in this life that it will always work out. Okay, for example, we look at the story of Job, and we look how Job suffered and suffered and suffered. But then we like to point at the end, but you see how God delivered him, vindicated him, and gave him back everything he had lost. True. So when we're suffering, we like to identify with Job. But do we ever identify with his 10 children? Did everything work out for his 10 children's good? What about Joseph in prison? When we're going through hard trying times, we like to think of Joseph in prison. Yes, he suffered, he languished in prison, but in the end, he came out. True, but how did he come out? Because he interpreted 2 dreams successfully. And when he interpreted them, they knew he was a good man and they get him out. But how did they know they interpreted them successfully? Well, because the one man that he said would be released was released. The other man whom he said would be hanged was hanged. What about that man? Did that work for his good? In more recent What about the children of Israel when they were finally delivered from Egypt? They crossed the Red Sea and they sang for joy. But what about the generation after generation before them that died in Egypt and never did cross the Red Sea and never did see deliverance? Did everything work out for their good? What about in more modern times? We love the story of Corrie ten Boom, how she suffered in prison, but she was delivered, and in the end, she could forgive those. She could forgive that prison guard that came and asked forgiveness. That is a wonderful story of triumph. But what about her sister Betsy, that never got to meet, never got to have someone ask her for forgiveness, died in prison? What about her father who died in prison? Did they work out for their good? Let's be real. When we're going through times of suffering, it may be that God will deliver us yet while we're alive. It may be that He will vindicate us and we'll have great time of joy again. But it could also be that we will die in sorrow and never see the end. Did that work for our good? To gain a little bit of a perspective on this, I think of a marriage. I've been married for about 15 years, and I miss my wife already. I wish you were here. I wish you all could meet her. It would be your privilege to meet her. But some of us, sitting in the back, are married and can relate to this. But most of the rest of you, I'm guessing most of you, fully plan on being married at some point. So I want you to think this through a little bit. For me, it's an easy comparison to make, but I think for even those that are not married, it's something you can relate to. Let me ask you, just be honest. Does a young man get married mostly to make his bride happy? Is that the chief reason of getting married? Is for your bride's happiness? Men, tell me, if you think of getting married, would that be your chief motivation? People are shaking their heads. No. What is your main motivation? Your own happiness. Is that not true? The main motivation what about the bride? Does she do it mostly for her husband's happiness or mostly for her own? Mostly for her own, I dare say. And if that sounds, I think I'm just being honest. I got married. I love my wife dearly, but I tell you, I got married mostly because I wanted to be happy. And I believe my wife got married mostly. Does that mean that marriage is a selfish arrangement? How can it not mean that marriage is a selfish arrangement if both the husband and the wife, the main motivation in it is seeking their own happiness? It's because of the way a good marriage works. A husband's highest joy comes from seeing his wife feel safe, loved, and cared for. That is the highest joy of a husband. A wife's highest joy comes from seeing that her husband feels admired, loved, and wanted. So, let's say I'm here, I'm gone for a few days. I know my wife is with the children. If on the way home I stop and get a gift, and I bring it to her to surprise and delight her, am I doing it for her good or for mine? Yes. It's one and inseparable. Her happiness is mine. Now that goes true even when I have to give up things that I want. I love Saturdays when I have them free because I'm busy through the week, and then I love a Saturday to go out. Okay, this is the time for projects around the house, and my children don't understand why I love that. They think good Saturday is when you don't have to do any work. And my idea of a good Saturday is when I do the work that I want to do. I love a good Saturday. But let's suppose I've got my plans. I'm all looking forward to it. And it turns out my wife had other plans. The children need clothes. Could you take the day and go with me shopping? I mean, I don't hate shopping, but it's not my favorite thing to do either. If I lay down everything I planned and I say, yes, I'll go with you. Am I doing that for my good? Am I doing it for hers? Which one of us gains the most from it? It's actually hard to tell. Even though I'm sacrificing, ultimately the payoff is so great. Ultimately, I wouldn't enjoy going and working that day if I knew she was disappointed and wasn't sure what to put on the table the next day because we're low on groceries. I wouldn't really get a joy out of it anyways. So when I see, okay, I'll give up, I'll go with you, and I see the joy that brings her, that brings me equal joy. Our happiness is tied together. The happiness of one is so dependent and intertwined with the happiness of the other that it's hard to tell the difference between the two. It's a lot the same with us and God. Now, I say that cautiously. There's a few things I have to explain first. There is one key difference. In marriage, two people enter marriage as equals. We do not enter a relationship with God as equals. I know we wouldn't say we do, but there's a little bit of that thrust sometimes that can come out. We do not. We are not equal with God. We never will be equal with God. Through all of eternity, we talk about God with man being intertwined. True to an extent, but we are never, never going to be equal with God. God created us for His glory. So was that selfish of God to create us for His glory more than for our happiness? No, no more selfish than it is entering a marriage mostly for your happiness. Because God in His wisdom ordained a way so that His glory is also our good. God's glory is our good. Now, some of the gods of the heathen we read about in the Bible were not that way at all. What brought them glory was human sacrifice. What brought them glory was the death of others. But what brings God glory is the same thing as what makes us abundantly, abundantly happy. We were created to glorify Him, and as we glorify Him, it brings happiness. So if serving God, just like if I cancel my plans and serve my wife for a day, we know that's for both of our good. It's one of the same. If serving God leads me to lay down my life in some remote part of the earth, unknown by man, is that for God's glory or for my good? It's both. God's glory is my good. God's glory is my good. Bottom line is this: God's side will win. He will take everything that happens, even if the devil made it happen, and He will use it to bring Him glory. Then He will gather all those who loved Him and will rejoice with them for all of eternity. Therefore, God's glory is our good. If I gave this a title, I would say, does everything work together for my good? Just the question of, does everything work together for my good? So keep this in mind, that phrase, God's glory is my good, as we go through this. Let's go to Philippians chapter 1. I'm doing a chapter study, but some of these verses I'm going to go over pretty quickly because they're not in with this theme, but I want to cover them briefly. Verses 1 and 2. Paul and Timothy, the servants of Jesus Christ, to all the saints in Christ Jesus which are at Philippi, with the bishops and deacons, grace be unto you and peace from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. Paul was writing to a church. Remember what had happened at Philippi earlier? Philippi was where that demon-possessed girl had come, and he had delivered her from a demon. And then he was cast into prison for it. And at midnight, Paul and Silas sang in prison. And an earthquake released them from the prison, but they didn't run. Do you see how even that story illustrates how that God's glory was their good? They're rejoicing. They could rejoice in prison because God was being glorified. A church formed there. Small wonder that a church formed there after seeing all that. And now near the end of Paul's life, this was years later, I'd say, he was writing that church a letter. And he greeted them. That's verses 1 and 2. Verses 3 and 4. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making request with joy. That's easy to understand. He's just saying, Philippians, I thank God every time I remember you. I pray for you with joy. Verse 5, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. Little note on this. He thanked God for the way they accepted the gospel and the way they immediately began to help him spread the gospel further. Later on in chapter 4, he mentions that this church had twice sent him support. So it was no wonder, yes, he rejoiced, not for himself. God would provide his needs either way. But he rejoiced to see that God was working in their lives. Quick note, God notices your giving. Please, youth, don't wait. Don't say one day when I have my own business and all that, when I am rich, then I'll start giving to the Lord. No, do it now. Do it now. Secretly, quietly. Don't do it publicly. None of this announcing to try to encourage others to do the same. Forget it. It's too hard for you to even know your own heart when you're doing that. He that gives in secret, God will reward you openly. Don't wait. Today, begin. Anything God blesses you with, make sure you pass that blessing on to his kingdom. Verses 6 and 7, being confident of this very thing, that he which has begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. Even as it is right for me to think this of you, because I have you in my heart, inasmuch as both in my bonds and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, you all are partakers of my grace. He's telling you here, Philippians, God will see you through to the end. How could he be so confident? How did he know God would see them through? Because they were saying yes to God. He could see it in their lives. They were saying yes to God. Always remember, there is no contradiction between saying, it's all Jesus, and saying, you need to yield to Jesus. I think that's something that's easy for us to understand. God will carry us through to the end, but he does so with our permission. He doesn't just carry us without our permission. He asks our permission. God will keep us in his care as long as we live. And even after we die, God will not forget us. At Jesus' return, the dead in Christ will rise and meet him in the air. He promised us. No, God will not forget you. God will be faithful to do all that he has said. He will carry you through, but he does it with our permission. Everything that Paul saw in the Philippian church showed that God was working in their lives. Quick illustration, I don't want to take too much time, but just to show that there is no contradiction between saying it's all Jesus and yet realizing that I need to respond to it. If I find myself, don't ask me how I would have gotten here, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 1,000 miles from any shore, I'm trying to swim, sharks are circling, a hurricane is bringing 60-foot waves, I'm getting cramped. It could not be worse. A rescue helicopter appears. Remember, if a rescuer came up beside me and said, keep going, there's an island a bit ahead, keep going, and I made it, I could take a little bit of credit. If he said, wait, there's a boat up here, about half a mile further. Can you make it that far? If you can, I'll pick you up. If he did that, I could take a little bit of credit for that too. But if he comes and says, here I am, shall I save you? Yes, please. And he grabs me and takes me. Does the fact that I said, yes, please, give me any of the credit? Of course not. If I'm a complete pauper, and I'm penniless, and the creditors are coming to take everything I have, and a friend walks up and says, here's $1 million check, take it. I sign it and run it to the bank. Do I get any of the credit? Well, I signed it. I took it to, of course I would do such a thing. That's meaningless in the big scheme of things. Of course I'd say yes. Of course I'd hold out my hand. Don't make the mistake of thinking that if I even have to respond to it, then I get some of the credit. No, that's not the way any of us thinks in real life. The reason Paul was so confident that God would take them to the end was he saw they were saying yes to God. Verse 8, for God is my record how greatly I long after you all in the affections of Jesus Christ. Paul loved them with God's love. Paul loved Jesus and worked alongside him so closely that Jesus' thoughts and emotions became his. We can do that. The more we walk with him, we begin to love people with God's love. Now, let's look here at verse 9. And this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgments. I'm going to go out on a little bit of a tangent here. It says that your love may abound in knowledge and judgment. He's saying, love more and more. Let your love grow, but it should be an intelligent love, based on solid reality, not based on itself. When I first got to know my wife, before we got married, and we went out, during our relationship ahead of time, there were some real restrictions we followed. We were not married, and we knew that. Nobody came and told us. Nobody gave us a bunch of rules. Honestly, we were on our own. We could make whatever rules we wanted, pretty much. My parents, her parents, they trusted us. They were okay with whatever we decided. But there was things we didn't do, and part of it was we really wanted to keep ourselves pure. But there's a deeper reason for this. If a young couple goes out in a dating, courtship, whatever you want to call it, relationship, and they want to get to know each other, it is so important that that relationship be based on something deep and solid. And the way you want to, on the deep and solid things that don't change. This is not a lesson on dating, but it comes in. It plays a part. It's the same as in the spiritual life. Don't rush into deeply romantic settings when you're getting to know somebody. Don't rush into that. Live life together, ordinary life. Learn to love the other person's personality. Learn to love his values, his sense of humor, his way of living ordinary life, his passion for God. This takes time. But if you refrain from all the deeply emotional things that give you the illusion of getting close really fast, oh, we just love each other, we can't stay apart from each other, and it's only our second time together. That can be an illusion. That can be a relationship built on itself, not on a solid foundation. It can be. Therefore, if you take the time, build it on the things that are deep. When hard time comes, you'll have a love that's built on tangible things that don't easily change. On the other hand, if your dating life consists largely of physical things that touch and romantic settings, you're in danger of building a love bubble. Do you know what a bubble is when you blow it? What's its foundation? Itself. It only holds on to itself. It's beautiful. It sparkles. It glimmers. What could possibly be wrong with something so beautiful? Well, what is the only wrong thing? As soon as it hits something hard, it pops. That's the end, because it has nothing solid that it's based on. You're quickly formed, beautiful and carefree, but it's built entirely on itself. True love will grow in difficult times because it's built on deep inner attributes. And those deep inner attributes are actually the most obvious in hard times. So that's just a little bit of a branch out in that. How to be sure when you're building a relationship with someone that you not get distracted by the quickly emotional, deceptive ones that make you feel like you really know each other and that your love runs deep, when in reality it's a bit like that bubble. Learn to know each other in ordinary, unromantic life. Because I'll be honest, that's what most of your life is going to be. Make sure that you really like that side of the person. Make sure that you really like the person when he's working apart from you. Make sure that you still like him when he's going through hard times and that you can totally stand the way he or she reacts in hard, difficult times, because you're going to have that. Then it's built on something. Apply that same thing to worship with God. True worship springs out of knowing God and loving his attributes. True worship does not spring out of focusing on worship. Know this, guys. You can get, okay, it's time. I'm feeling a little bit behind the times here. Let's have a beautiful worship evening. That has its place. But worship is not built upon worship. Worship is built on knowing and loving the attributes of God. Why do we worship? True worship and love rises as we realize things like, one, he first loved us. Meditate on that. While we were yet sinners, he died for us. He's big enough that he stretches out the heavens with a span, the breadth of his hand. He lives inside me. He will never leave or forsake me. Make sure you're grounded in those things. Make sure your worship has enough of time of remembering those things, singing them to God and meditating on those truths. Because when we love and worship based on these things, what happens when we sit in prison, chained and about to die? Well, when we're sitting in prison and about to die, it's still true that he first loved us. It's still true that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. He's still big enough that he stretches out the heavens with a span. He still lives inside me, and he will still never leave me or forsake me. Your love and worship can continue right through that time because it's based on that. Don't come away feeling like I've worshiped as you go out, if it does not bring a life of actual holiness, if it does not bring a life of actually living for him. Because you can feel like you've worshiped, but it is more when you think of who God is and you meditate on it and you fix your mind on these truths, and worship arises. But it arises in a way that brings a truly godly life. Verse 10, that you may approve things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ. See, when you worship him properly, and you learn to walk with him, when our love abounds in knowledge and judgment, we know it's an intelligent worship. It's not a blind feeling worship. It's a worship based on who God is. When that happens, we will choose things that are excellent. We will be sincere and without offense till the day that Jesus comes again. True worship will not allow a life of sin, and a life of sin will not allow true worship. So if you're living a life of sin, whatever you're experiencing during your times of singing and raising your hands is not worship. True worship will not allow a life of sin, and a life of sin will not allow true worship. Verse 11, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ unto the glory and praise of God. What? Being filled with the fruits of righteousness. That will happen when we know who God is. Again, I want to stress that if there's one overriding theme through my 3 messages that I'm preaching, I want it to be this. The Christian life is based on reality. It's real. The changes are real. Please don't fall into this of every time you read Bible verses about righteousness and holiness and sanctification, that is a process that happens in the mind of God in the record books of heaven that we believe by faith. Yes, but no. It goes way beyond that. His power is such that your life is different. His power is such that those watching you without even hearing your words will see there's a power in his life. He doesn't do the things he used to do, and he does a lot of things he didn't used to do. He's different. His life is filled with joy. Those sins he never could quit are just gone. That's the transforming power. The power is real. It's tangible. You see the change. You don't just take it by faith that it happened. You can see it. Verse 12 and 13, but I would you should understand, brethren, that the things which have happened to me have fallen rather unto the furtherance of the gospel, so that my bonds in Christ are manifest in all the palace and in all other places. Paul is now turning to his life and saying, people, everything that's been happening to me is turning out for my good. It's all working out for good. Despite all the accusations that have been thrown at me, Paul is saying, people are realizing that the real reason I'm in prison is for the cause of Christ. Verse 14, and many of the brothers in the Lord, becoming confident because of my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Oh, See, one of the things he saw working out for good was the fact that, let me tell you this, what many times happens during protests? When there are protests and people are going out to protest cruelty and government forces open fire and several people die, what usually happens? If you've been following the news over the last 10 years, what around the world, what usually happens when protesters get shot? They become martyrs, and the protests run all the deeper. Many tyrants have found this out. You clamp down and you begin to persecute, the work spreads. Now, in that same way, that is often the result of persecution. And Paul saw. Others are getting bold. They see that Paul's in prison. He's shipwrecked, and he comes to shore, and he keeps right on going, and he heals somebody. And then he's whipped, and he preaches the gospel. They saw Stephen. The stones were thrown, and as the stones were thrown, what did he see? He looked up. Oh, this is a tangent, but I just can't help it. What did Jesus say? What does the Bible say repeatedly that Jesus did when he went to heaven? He sat at the right hand of God. Over and over it talks about sitting at the right hand of God. What did Stephen see when he looked up just before he died? I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man is standing on the right hand of God. Jesus couldn't stay sitting as his children were being killed. He stood. He had to watch. He had to get close. He couldn't stay comfortable. He had to stand. That's the only time we read that Jesus standing at the right hand of God was just as his servant was at the point of death. That's kind of a tangent, but I just couldn't help that. So, as people saw that, they were all the more encouraged. Go without fear. Well, how did that work out for Paul's good? That didn't release Paul. Paul ended up dying a martyr's death. But Paul was good enough to see his glory is my good. That's what I'm for. And the more glory I can bring him, this life is short. Then I'm going to go to eternity, and I'll rejoice at his feet. And I will worship him. And then he gives me a crown. And then I cast the crown before his feet. Is it his glory or is it my good? Yes, yes, yes. It's all one and the same. His glory is my good. And in that way, he could rejoice and say, everything's working out for my good. Everything's working out for God's glory. One little side note on here, be discerning, though, what you call persecution. You all know the verse. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you. Some of you know what I'm going to say next because I've said this many times at home. Blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you and shall say all manner of evil against you. All sounds good so far, but there's a few more words. He lays out two conditions. What are they? When they say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. That's when it's persecution. If the evil things they're saying are false, and if it's for the sake of Jesus, then blessed are you. Be careful. Getting a speeding ticket is not a persecution. Getting criticized, even harshly, is not persecution, unless it's false and it's for his sake. Then you can rejoice and be exceeding glad, because great is your reward in heaven. Verses 15 through 18. Okay, actually, I'm just going to skip over those because I'm running a little short on time here. At home, I wouldn't. I try to go over each verse, but I'd like to keep going. I have a few more points to make here. Verse 19. Well, let's just look at verse 18 then. What then? Notwithstanding every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and I therein do rejoice, yes, and will rejoice. That is verse 18. It's a little bit complicated trying to understand what these verses are saying here. But at the end of the day, he said, there are others that are preaching Christ. They might not even know their own hearts. Some of them are actually more, and at the end, they're actually kind of glad that Paul's getting what he deserves. He never did use wisdom. The way he went in there and did this, he kind of deserved some of what he was getting. And you know what? Paul didn't even resent it. Okay, I don't mind. I'm the one sitting in prison. You have flourishing ministries. You have crowds coming to hear you preach. Wonderful. If you're preaching Christ, I rejoice. His glory is my good. Verse 19, for I know that this shall turn to my salvation through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Paul didn't care about his reputation. He didn't care about anything. He knew that ultimately all would work together for his good and God's glory. How would it work together for his good and God's glory? Let's keep reading. Verse 20. According to my earnest expectation and hope, that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or death. He knew there was two possibilities. All this attention that he was getting now, all the people that were beginning to realize that the reason he's actually in prison is for the gospel. Maybe all this preaching of the other people would make the authorities reconsider and release him. Paul wasn't quite sure what was going to happen yet. He seemed to think he was going to go see the Philippians again, even though it turns out, as far as we know, he never did. He never visited that church again. He died before he could visit them again. Maybe all this preaching would make the authorities reconsider and release him. That would be great. Or maybe they would get upset and kill him. Great. Either way, life or death. If you're living for the glory of God, you can't lose. Life or death doesn't matter. God will get the glory. 21, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Win, win. Live, I preach him some more. Die, I will awaken and see his face. What could go wrong? Know this, though. Those two are dependent on each other. I'm reading a book right now at school to the students, dying testimonies of the saved and unsaved. And story after story, it only gives the last day or two of their lives. You can see some for whom dying was gain. And you can see some for whom dying was not gain. What made the difference? Those for whom dying was gain was those who could say, my life was Christ. For me to live is Christ. If you can say, for me to live is Christ, then you can say, to die is gain. But if you living is not Christ, then you dying is not gain. Keep those two together. Verse 22 through 24. But if I live on in the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor. Yet what I shall choose I cannot tell, for I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. Was God giving him a choice? Was God asking Paul, which one do you want? I don't know. Maybe it was. It's like he says, I'm hard pressed between the two. Maybe he was just thinking what I would want. But I know my mom, many, many years ago, I think I was maybe just a baby, seemed to be given this choice by God of where she was very, very sick and slipped into a coma. And in her coma, she suddenly found herself climbing a set of stairs. And she got to the top, and there was a door, and the door opened. And Jesus was there. And he said, do you want to come in? And my mom looked down at the bottom of the stairs and saw the family. She said, Jesus, I think I'd like to go to my family. And he said, okay. And later she awoke, I don't know if it was then or a little later, she awoke from her coma. I'm so glad that she chose that for us, because I was young enough, I probably would never have known her, or maybe have no memories of her, if she had chosen to go be with, to depart this life at that point. But Paul was, at that point for my mom, just as it was for Paul, either one, in a way, was gain. Could I just depart? This life will all be over. The next moment that I know, I'm in God's presence. Or do I go back and continue to bring him glory in this life? Either way is a win if you're living for God's glory. All verses 25 through 26. And being confident of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy of faith, that your rejoicing for me may be more abundant in Jesus Christ by my coming to you again. I don't like to say he was wrong, but it does appear that he was a little too optimistic here in thinking that he was going to be released and go see them again. As I understand, I think he was released, was it? And then immediately recaptured and martyred by Nero. But he actually got to experience some of both. The book of Acts records that for the last 2 years something, he had considerable freedom. He undoubtedly preached the word of Christ for a few more years yet. And then also, he died a martyr's death. There's a story. Remember what I said at the beginning. God will win. That's the reality. God will win. So if we join him, it will work out for our good. What a testimony to be able to say that both living and dying are good options. There's a story I've heard. I've never been able to confirm it. I've never heard it any other place. I just heard a story in the Soviet Union, was it many years ago, of a man who was captured. And he was taken, and the authorities thought this is a good opportunity. Get him to recant in front of a crowd. They took him out to the marketplace, held a gun to his head, said, I'm counting to 5. At the count of 5, if you have not given up, you will die. They said, and the crowd of people gathered around said, 1. And the man whispered, for me to live is Christ and die is gain. Said, you'll change your mind yet. 2. He said it a little louder, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. 3. He said it louder, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. 4. He shouted it aloud, for me to live is Christ, and die is gain. They said 5, and this time the whole crowd erupted in such a roar. They said, for me to live is Christ, and die is gain. So the shout was so loud it drowned out the sound of the gunshot. And they were never able to wipe Christianity out of that village again. It was there. He saw the glory of God, and when he stood there, did it work for his good? Not in this life, but this life is just a very small piece of it. He loved the Lord. Do you think in eternity, when he stands with Christ, he's given the martyr's crown? He casts it at Jesus' feet and says it was actually all you. And the crowd of people gather, and he sees people there in heaven that came there because of his testimony. Do you think then he's going to look up and say, all things worked together for good to them that love God? Absolutely. You have to have that. You have to have that life. You have to keep that perspective. Sometimes it works out for our good in this life in a physical way, but it will always work out ultimately for our good if our end is God's glory. I've just a few more verses here I want to quickly cover here before I'm done. Verse 27. Verse 27, only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. He's just saying here, okay, you want to be able to say that dying is gain? You want to face death without any fear? Live a life that is appropriate for a little Christ. Christian, meaning a little Christ. Unite with others that are doing the same. Be careful both ways with this. When it says about that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. This is easily abused both ways. Be careful not to unite with those whose end goal is not to glorify God. You might say, well, I don't want to be judgmental. I'm sorry, sometimes you have to be. You have to discern situations. You have to keep yourself separate from those whose end goal is not to glorify God. You can sense it pretty quickly when you're around somebody. Does his life shine with Jesus? Not just in words. You can just sense it. When you're a Christian, it's amazing how quickly. Sometimes in the first 30 seconds, you can just sense it in somebody. Now, you can be wrong, so don't always stick to your first 30-second impression. But oftentimes, you can sense it. Don't unite with those. Don't become close friends, hang out buddies with those whose end goal is not to glorify God. Of course, you can be friendly, but be careful. Evil communications really do corrupt good manners. On the other hand, when you see somebody that is his life, that is his goal, you know it. Even if you're doctrinally different, even if you feel it, there's a common spirit there. Unite with them and work with them to spread the gospel and to edify each other. Verse 28. And not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which is to them a proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. Your adversaries are the devil, the world, and false brethren. When you stand firm, unafraid of death, unafraid of spiritual attack, persecution, mockery, or loss of reputation, that is a sign that God is for you and is against your adversaries. If you look back at the stories of the martyrs that died, probably in our day too, but there are not as many written down yet. Those that died long ago, and they, as they were led to their death, sometimes they were led, say, one at a time to the water to be drowned. And those that waiting their turn to go be thrust into the water, were singing. I don't remember the exact specific stories, but things like that. A person taken to his death, and as the fire is burning, he lifts his voice and sings. That does two things. It shows that God is on your side. And when it shows that God is on your side, it shows that God is against the adversaries, those that are persecuting you. See that verse? Not in any way terrified by your adversaries. You have joy even in persecution, which is to them proof that they are working against God. For you, it is proof that you are working with God, of your salvation. It does both. Do know that standing firm is not the same as being argumentative, stubborn, or nasty. I know people that insist that they're constantly persecuted and they hardly have any friends. Well, I will agree that they hardly have any friends. But I will say it is not because they're being persecuted for Christ, because the things that are being said against them are true. The wisdom that is from above, James says, is what? Did anyone remember any of those words? The wisdom that is from above, if you have God's wisdom, it is peaceable, it is gentle, it is easy to be entreated, it is full of mercy and good fruits, it is without partiality, it is without hypocrisy. Those are the marks of true wisdom. If you didn't have time to write all that down, you want to write one thing. Look at James 3:17. That gives a list. Someone whose wisdom is from the Lord shows that list. If someone is not showing that list, be slow to consider them persecuted for Christ, because the wisdom that is from above, it matches that. Quickly, verses 29 and 30. For unto you it is given in the behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for his sake, having the same conflict which you saw in me, and now here to be in me. The Philippians had seen Paul beaten and taken into prison. They had maybe seen the wreckage of the prison the next morning. Now they were hearing that the persecution was continuing. Paul's saying, you know what, Philippians, your time is coming. You're going to experience some of this too. But guess what? For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. What is the ultimate, just the conclusion of this, if I could put it in a summary? All things do work together for them that love God. If you love the Lord, it will work out for your good. It might work out in this life for your good, in a way that you're actually released and things go well for you again. But that is not a promise. Don't hold to that promise. because you might then lose faith in God when it doesn't happen, because it's not a promise God gives that it will work out in this life. But one thing you can know firmly, if you live for the Lord, you stand firm in gentleness, goodness, faith, patience, and you say, my end goal is the glory of God, it will work for your good. God will get the glory, and he will see to it. Just like we said earlier, in a marriage relationship, her happiness is my good. My happiness is her good. God in his love has arranged it so that the thing that glorifies him most is the same thing as what makes us have the most abundant joy. Just make sure you understand what I did not say. I did not say what brings God the most glory is our happiness. I said what brings God the most glory is the same thing that gives us the most happiness. If I feel that God's glory, God is always glorified when I'm happy, I will seek my own happiness and say, well, then that's bringing God glory. But if I say, no, it's connected. My living for the Lord, my telling others about him, my getting victory over sin, and rejoicing in the Lord in true worship, that brings him glory. And incidentally, that is what brings me the truest happiness also. The same thing that brings God the most glory brings us the most happiness. His glory is our good. Live for that.